Platting Board will come to order. It is December 4th, and it is 6:35 p.m. May we have roll call, please?
Mr. Story, Mr. Abel, Mr. Fuller,
Here.
Mr. Young,
Present.
Mr. Cole, Mr. Kange,
Present.
Mr. Edmondson, Mr. Walker,
Present.
Ms. Enix.
Present.
Thank you.
And I understand the members who are absent have been excused. Thank you. First item on the agenda is approvals, the action summaries of Wednesday, November 6th. I have a positive motion to approve the action summaries. Mr. Kange and Mr. Walker seconds. Is there any discussion or modifications? Is there any objection to the motion? Hearing and seeing none, the motion carries. The next item on the agenda is the minutes, approval of the minutes. And the minutes are for October 2nd, 2013, and for November 6th, 2013. May I have a positive motion to approve the minutes, please? Mr. Cole moves and Mr. Walker seconds. Is there any discussion or modification of the minutes? Is there any opposition to the minutes, to the motion, for approving the minutes? Hearing and seeing none, the motion carries. The minutes are approved. Next item on the agenda is special order of business, disclosures. Are there any disclosures this evening? Hearing and seeing none, I have a few. I tried not to have any, and I almost thought I was going to make it. Okay, in the case S11987-3, Denali, Alaska Federal Credit Union Subdivision Tracts 1 and 2, my firm has had business dealings with the petitioner's representative on other matters. I am a former employee of the petitioner's representative. I have no financial or personal interest in the matters before the board tonight. I can remain impartial in fact and action as a member of this board without personal bias. My past involvement and personal interest will not prevent me from fairly evaluating the facts of this case. May I have a positive motion directing me to participate in case S11987. Mr. Kange, Mr. Fuller. Mr. Kange, will you speak to your motion, or state your motion and then speak to your motion, please?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. In case S11987-3, I move to direct Chairman Mr. Young to participate in the case.
Thank you. And would you speak to your motion, please?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Based on your statement, you have no financial or personal interest in the case. I do feel that you can act fair in the case and move or direct that you participate, and will be voting in favor of my motion.
Thank you. Are there any objections to the motion? Hearing and seeing none, the motion passes. I'm directed to participate in case S11987-3, Denali, Alaska Federal Credit Union. My next disclosure is case S12033-1, Shangri-La Estates, East Subdivision, Block 1, Lot 5. My corporation has worked with the petitioner's representative on other matters. Additionally, I have knowledge of the hydrology and hydrogeology of this property. I have no financial or personal interest in the matters before the board. I can remain impartial in fact and action as a member of this board without personal bias. My past involvement and personal interests will not prevent me from fairly evaluating the facts of this case. May I have a positive motion directing me to participate, please? Mr. Kange and Mr. Cole seconds. Mr. Kange, will you state your motion, please?
I move to direct Chairman Young to participate in case S12033-1, Shangri-La Estates East Subdivision.
And would you speak to your motion, please?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Based on your testimony that you have no financial or personal interest in the project or the case, I feel you can present and act fairly, and I move to direct you to participate and to intend to vote in favor of my motion.
Thank you. Is there any discussion or opposition to the motion? Hearing and seeing none, the motion carries, and I'm directed to participate in the case Shangri-La Estates East Subdivision. My last disclosure is case S12029-1, Your Park Subdivision Lot 5A. My firm has had business dealings with the petitioner's representative on other matters. I'm a former employee of the petitioner's representative. I'm a member of the Spenard Community Council. I have no financial or personal interest in the matters before the board. I can remain impartial in fact and action as a member of this board without personal bias. My past involvement and personal interests will not prevent me from fairly evaluating the facts of this case. May I have a positive motion directing me to participate, please? Mr. Walker, and Mr. Kane seconds. Mr. Walker, will you state your motion, please?
I move that in case number S12029-1, the Your Park subdivision, that you be directed to participate.
Thank you. And would you speak to your motion, please?
Based on your statements here before us today, lack of any financial interest or significant other interest in the matter, that you can act impartially and assist us in resolving this matter.
Thank you. Is there any discussion or opposition to this motion? Hearing and seeing none, the motion passes. I'm directed to participate. Just a couple of matters of housekeeping. There is a case S120311 Eagle River High School, which has been postponed indefinitely. Is there anybody here tonight that has come for this hearing for the Eagle River High School? The next case, as information, is case S12019-1. It's the Waldron subdivision, and that case is requested for an indefinite postponement. Is anyone here in the audience tonight here for this case? No? Fine. Nobody had their time wasted. That's good. Okay, so next item is informational items, abbreviated plats, and action summaries of October 21st, October 28th, and November 18th. Is there any discussion on these matters? Hearing and seeing none, we'll move to the consent agenda. We have do we address this now? Okay. May I have a positive motion to approve the consent agenda, please? Mr. Kane and Mr. Cole. Is there any discussion or objection or any request to pull any of these out of the consent agenda? Is there any opposition to the motion to approve the consent agenda? Hearing and seeing none, the consent agenda passes. We are now into new business. The procedure by which the public may speak to the Platting Board at its meeting is, after the staff presentation is completed on public hearing items, the chair will ask for public testimony on the issue. Excuse me. Persons who wish to testify will follow the time limits established in Commission rules of procedures. Petitioners, including all of his or her representatives, have 10 minutes. Part of this time may be reserved for rebuttal. And the way to reserve time for rebuttal, you're automatically granted whatever time you don't use during the, thank you, whatever time you don't use will be reserved for rebuttal. But if you wish to specifically reserve time for rebuttal, tell us at the beginning and we will block that out for you out of your 10 minutes. Representatives of groups, community councils, PTAs, etc., have 5 minutes, and individuals have 3 minutes. When your testimony is complete, you may be asked questions by the board. You may only testify once on any issue unless questioned by the board. Any individual may have appeal rights relating to any action the Platting Board takes. Appeal of this decision or any of the conditions is governed by AMC 21.11.304. The decision of the board at the scheduled public hearing shall become final 7 calendar days after the date the decision is made on the record, unless a written request is submitted to the Planning Division prior to the expiration of the 7th day to prepare a written decision based on the record made at the hearing, and the request is accompanied by a written notice of intent to appeal. Adoption of the written decision by the Planning Board becomes the final appealable decision. Within 20 days of the final appealable decision, an interested party must file with the municipal clerk either a written motion alleging new evidence or changed circumstances per AMC 21.11.503 or an appeal of the board's final appealable decision per AMC 21.30. The first case tonight is Cruz Industrial Subdivision, case S12020-1. May we have staff's presentation, please?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is a request to vacate a 30-foot wide building setback from Cruz Industrial Subdivision, Block 3, Lot 5, per Plat 73-40. The purpose of this vacation is to allow a building to be constructed closer to East 96th Court. The required I-2 setback at this site the required I-2 district setback, which applies to this site, would normally be 10-foot front yard setback from East 96th Court. But of course, there's the plat note requiring 30 feet instead of the usual 10. East 96th Court is not constructed, but has the required 60-foot right-of-way dedication. The petition site, like all other lots, or all other tracts in this block, gain road access from East 95th Court. The 30-foot wide building setback is no longer needed. The Planning Division and the Traffic Division have no objection to this vacation request. The Bayshore Clat Community Council did not comment. One public comment was received. That's on page 81 of your packet. Therefore, the department recommends approval of the vacation of the 30-foot wide building setback for this particular lot, Cruz Industrial Subdivision, Block 3, Lot 5. Be happy to answer any questions, and the petitioner is here as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any questions of staff? May we have the petitioner's representative, please? Would you state your name for the record and your...
Yes, sir.
spell your last name?
Before my time starts, Mr. Chairman, being an elderly gentleman, I can't hardly hear you. I don't think your mic is working. I don't know if anybody else in the back can hear you.
Can anybody in the back here raise your hand, please?
Maybe it's just me.
Well, people in the front can hear you. Can hear me. No, you can't hear me in the back?
Oh, now you can.
Okay, got it. Thank you very much.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, I appreciate you taking the time to hear this case. The gentleman that's on staff pretty much summed it up. I'm here. My name is Paul Michelson. Last name is spelled M-I-C-H-E-L-S-O-H-N. I have constructed a commercial building for Mr. Webb, who's the petitioner on this said lot. And while constructing the lot, we were notified that there was a situation with, in the event we wanted to build another building on the back of the lot's south part. We found out that there is a 30-foot easement on the lot's 10-foot. There is a 10-foot utility easement and then an additional 30-foot overlapping the 10-foot utility easement on the south side of the lot, which butts to East 95th Court. East 95th Court is not constructed at the time, and doing diligence and contacting several agencies, we have learned that East 96th Court, well, never is a long time, but the possibility of it being constructed is probably none to never. It has approximately a 26 to 35-foot ditch running right down the entire center of it, and it would take approximately $1.2 million to $1.4 million per foot almost to construct this road. The city says it will not undertake it. It will not bother with it. There is a lot of discrepancy on whether 95th Court is actually a road, but all the properties that abut to the north side of the property on 95th Court do have a legal address listed as 95th Court, which originally was a railroad easement right-of-way. The railroad has stated that they gave up that right-of-way about 20 years ago or so. They do not want it. They have no interest in building a sideline. So we ask this because the petitioner, Mr. Webb, is considering building a small commercial shop in the back of the property, and if he has to build it 30 feet from the so-called front yard setback, which we consider now as the rear yard setback, that he loses approximately over 700 square feet of his I-2 property. He was forced to purchase I-2 property due to it's a towing business, and zoning requires that they have towing operations in I-2 versus B or I-1 even. The property immediately to the south is a salvage yard. It's a metal salvage yard. It's been there for about 15 to 18 years. They have no plans to, I think, leave. So there's no reason to develop that property to the south. We're asking that you vacate this 30-foot easement. We understand that the 10-foot utility easement will remain. And we ask that if you do approve the removal of the 30-foot setback, that you please record it, if you could, and put it in the paper so that it follows and tracks the course of the property in the future. There's not much more I can say that staff hasn't already stated. I don't think there's any objections. I don't think there's any need for it. I think everybody now considers East 95th Court as their front yard, and the setbacks pertaining to I-2 properties would remain on the East 95th Court and not necessarily be represented by the south, which is East 96th Court, which doesn't exist there. And I think that's all I need to say tonight. If there's any questions, I'd be welcome to answer them.
Thank you. You have 6 minutes and 18 seconds left for rebuttal. Are there any questions of the petitioner's representative tonight?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Is there anyone from the public wishing to testify on this matter tonight? Anyone at all? Would you like to use any of your rebuttal time?
No, sir.
And can you hear me now?
Yes, sir.
Thank you. No one wishing to testify from the public. The matter is now, the public hearing portion of this matter is now closed, and the matter rests with the board. May I have a positive motion, please? Mr. Kange, just state your motion, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. In case S12020-1, I move to approve the vacation of the 30-foot wide building setback.
Thank you. And Ms. Enix seconds. And Mr. Kange, would you speak to your motion, please?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Based on the petitioner's statement, no objections from the reviewing agencies, including Planning Division and Traffic Division, it appears that the 30-foot setback is no longer needed. Therefore, I intend to vote in favor of my motion.
Thank you. Is there any additional discussion? I too am going to support this motion, and one of the reasons I'm supporting this is that Plat 97-1 provided matching 30-foot wide dedication to East 96th Court, and therefore a 30-foot wide building setback is no longer needed, which you also stated. And so staff has the same findings. I support the staff. I support the staff's position. Is there any opposition to this motion? Any further discussion? Hearing and seeing none, the motion passes. It's approved. The next item on the agenda is case S11987-3, Denali, Alaska Federal Credit Union Subdivision. May we have staff's presentation, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is a request for vacation of two remainder 32-foot by 16-foot portions of a 32-foot easement for road purposes dedicated by Book 119, page 315, running along the north and south property boundary of proposed Track 2. The original case for Denali, Alaska Federal Credit Union Subdivision was heard and approved by the Platting Board in August of 2013. In preparing to submit the final plat for recording, the petitioner's representative found that the two 32-foot by 16-foot remainder portions of that 32-foot easement dedicated by book and page had not been included in the original application and subsequent approval. Thus, this request is to vacate those two remaining portions. This vacation request has been reviewed and found to conform to municipal vacation policy. Essentially, this request is simply a housekeeping matter to vacate the remaining portions. Access to all tracks are provided legal and physical access, and planning staff has no objection to the vacation of the two remainder 32-foot by 16-foot portions of that 32-foot easement for road purposes. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any questions of staff? Would the petitioner's representative please come forward? Do you wish to reserve any of your time for rebuttal?
Sure.
How much would you like to reserve?
8 minutes.
8 minutes?
Mm-hmm. Hello, Mr. Chair and members of the board. My name is Tanya Hickok, Hickok, with Dowell HKM. And tonight we're representing Denali, Alaska Federal Credit Union. And Mr. Whitfield stated this is pretty much a housekeeping matter. In the August Platting Board meeting and vacation application, we had requested for the book and page to be vacated the 16-foot width. But if you look at the book and page, there's a paragraph 2 that talks about two 32-foot perpetual easements that run east and west. So not only the 16-foot north and south perpetual easement, but also the east and west. And so these two corner pieces actually overlapped the previous vacation. So just to make sure that we're all on the above board, we wanted to make sure and come back and get those formally vacated before we had our plat finalized yet this year. So with that, we'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. And you have 1 minute and 3 seconds plus your 8 minutes remaining. Are there any questions of the petitioner's representative? Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Is there anyone from the public wishing to testify on this matter tonight? Anyone at all? Hearing and seeing none, would you like to use any of your rebuttal time? And the answer is no. The public hearing portion of this meeting is closed, and the matter now rests with the board. May I have a positive motion, please? And Mr. Walker.
In case number S11987-3, Denali, Alaska Federal Credit Union Subdivisions Tracts 1 and 2, I move the approval of the request to vacate two remainder 32-foot by 16-foot portions of a 32-foot easement for road purposes dedicated by Book 119, page 315, running along the north and south property boundary of proposed Tract 2.
Thank you, Mr. Walker. And Mr. Cole seconds. Mr. Walker, would you speak to your motion, please?
This is a matter of housekeeping. We were here, I think, back in August on this very matter, and we thought that we had vacated that strip in its entirety, but apparently due to paragraph 2, there were some cross easements that need to be cleaned up, as shown on the map on page 4, and I believe that it meets all of the requirements for vacating. The two sections are no longer of any use, being, well, sitting out in the middle of islands in the middle of nowhere.
Thank you. Is there any further discussion on this matter? Any questions? Is there any opposition to this motion? Hearing and seeing none, the motion passes. Thank you. The next case is S12033-1, Shangri-La Estates East Subdivision. May we have staff's presentation, please?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The petitioner is requesting that Shangri-La Estates East Subdivision Block 2, Lot 5 be exempted from a plat note requiring advanced septic systems. During development of this lot, a conventional on-site septic system that does not comply with the plat note was permitted by the Building Safety Division and installed by the owner. The error was discovered during Building Safety's review of another building permit for a conventional on-site septic system by the same engineer on a neighboring lot in the same subdivision. There were two public comments laid on the table, members of the public who opposed the petitioner's request. The Planning Division recommends approval of the petitioner's request, and I'd be happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any questions of staff? I have a question of staff. Are you aware of the model that was put forward to evaluate the nitrates on this lot, or on the, for this subdivision?
To be honest with you, I didn't know there were different models. I don't know. Perhaps the petitioner would be able to answer that question.
Thank you. Would the petitioner's representative please come forward? State your name for the records and let us know if you'd like to reserve any time for rebuttal.
Mr. Chairman, members of the board, my name is Mike Anderson with Anderson Engineering, A-N-D-E-R-S-O-N. I represent the owners of Lot 5, Block 2, Scott and Adriana Grigsby, in this action. And I was instrumental in the initial phases of this project with the soils work under a different surveyor, a different engineer at the time. We went through and did the first 6 lots, and we found subsurface soils consisting of silty, sandy gravel to depths of 18 feet with no groundwater. These conditions are typically very good for the construction of on-site septic systems. I've also designed, constructed, tested probably 15 of the systems in Shangri-La Estates immediately to the west of this subdivision. So when the Grigsby's came to me and said to design a septic system for the first development in this subdivision, I was under the impression that there probably weren't any platting requirements for nitrate reducing systems. So I looked at the plat, I missed the note. We put together a design based on the subsurface soil systems we encountered, turned the design into the city, went through the review process. They could find no problems with the design, and they issued the permit. We then constructed the septic system. It was inspected by the city and approved by the city. Everything looked good until we went in for the next septic system permit for the adjacent lot. At that time, we found out that there was a plat note requiring nitrate reducing septic systems. So that's why we're here tonight, to get an exception to the plat note for the first septic system installed in the subdivision. The plat note will remain in effect for the remainder of the lots. We went through and we talked to Jim Munter, who was the hydrogeologist who prepared the report. He stated that his report was very conservative. He made some assumptions that were conservative, and he also stated that this one lot would have no impact on the drinking water in the wells down gradient from the subdivision. And so that's why we are requesting that we get an exception to the plat note.
Thank you. You have 7 minutes and 35 seconds left for rebuttal. Are there any questions for the petitioner?
Yeah, through the chair. So which lots did he base his judgment on to come to that conclusion?
This study was based on the entire subdivision, a total of 37 lots. I believe there's 39 lots in the subdivision, so I think his study must have been done before the final plat was recorded.
I mean, do you know what test holes he came to those conclusions, where they were located?
Well, he didn't base his study on test holes. It's based on the amount of septic effluent that goes into the ground from the 37 lots. And the nitrates that is carried with that effluent into the ground.
So that's in total then?
It's the total of the entire subdivision.
So that's why one lot doing it wouldn't impact the...
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
Are there any additional questions of the petitioner's representative? I have a few. I was able to find the model online tonight, and so I was able to look at it, and the inputs, I talked to the DEC about model inputs, and they recommend using 60 milligrams per liter of nitrates for a conventional septic system, and the model only used 40. And the assumption in the model was that it was based on a paper published in Pennsylvania. Do you have any information that 40 is a more appropriate number on this lot than 60 milligrams per liter for leach field effluent?
I did do some research on that, and most of the information I found, 40 was even high. So I'm not sure how DEC arrives at 60. In my opinion, that's much too high for septic effluent.
And thank you. And for so you think 40 is even too high?
From the information I was able to find, I went to the EPA Blue Book, and they seem to think that 30 was a more reasonable amount.
Okay. And then on the model, I was looking at the way this model is set up is the entire subdivision is modeled as a leach field instead of a portion of the lot where the leach field actually exists. So there's going to be much more dilution when a model is set up that way. And I disagree that the model is conservative because I think it's liberal in including more dilution than is adequate or is appropriate. The other part of the model I looked at required the Darcy's Law to figure out the upgradient inputs. And I don't know if you had an opportunity to look at that or not, but the model that was used the modeling that was done didn't follow the model parameters or the model method. It was altered. And I was wondering if you have any input on that.
I did go through the study. It's an 80-acre subdivision. He used a 34-acre recharge area and a 40-acre upgradient area, which in my opinion are very small. I think he should have probably used the entire 80 acres of the subdivision for the recharge area, and the upgradient area would be probably much bigger. And then basically the way this formula works is all you're doing is diluting the effluent with either groundwater or rainfall. He used 20 inches of rainfall per year, and he made an estimate that only 30% of it would absorb into the ground. Now, everything I've been able to find about the absorption of stormwater in a wilderness area is closer to 90%. So I think that the amount of rainfall that recharges the aquifer is much higher than what he used to dilute the nitrates in the septic systems. That being the case, it wouldn't take much of a change from 30% to even 40% to show that this nitrate study would be less than 5 milligrams per liter.
I did my own calculations, and unfortunately, I didn't have time to go through all of the parameters. I did look at all the parameters that Mr. Munner used, but I didn't look at the information that you generated from your percolation test, which I thought should have been incorporated in the model. And I calculated 47 milligrams per liter, which is pretty high. The other aspect of the model I looked at was that the entire model was, or the model was for the entire subdivision rather than looking at the effluent from the upgradient septic systems being part of the background for the downgradient systems.
I've done several of these calculations for DEC, and if you use the examples that they have in their handout, I don't think there's a single lot with a septic system on it that will pass. I think you'll find that the nitrate content of the effluent with that small of an area is always going to be much greater than the acceptable 10 milligrams per liter.
Even with the advanced systems that were set up for the subdivision?
Well, I think the advanced systems will help, certainly. But you're going to have to get down to a much smaller nitrate content with your effluent. I mean, this whole formula works through the dilution of the effluent. So depending on how much rainfall you have and how much upgradient water you have flowing through the area to dilute the nitrate in the effluent, that's the only thing that's going to make it pass. And the smaller your area, the smaller your dilution water. So I just have a difficult time with the DEC model. Okay. And the same thing here. There's no downgradient dilution, and yet we're probably, 1,000 feet away from the closest well. So when you leave the property, if your nitrate content is, say 7.5 milligrams per liter, it still has to travel another 1,000 feet and get more dilution from rainfall and absorbed water for that 1,000 feet. So it's going to be even more diluted by the time it reaches that well, 1,000 feet down gradient. And again, it's got to go through 300 to 400 feet of bedrock before it gets down into the serving aquifer.
I agree. I just haven't seen the calculations that support that. Mr. Walker.
Did I hear right that this was the first lot that was built?
That's correct.
And so if we grant a variance on the very first lot, how many other households are going to come in asking for variances because it'd be unfair for them to have to use an expensive?
I don't know. I guess they would have to go through the same process. We're not changing the plat note. The plat note remains in effect.
Mr. Kange?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Are there others? This isn't the first house to be built off Mountain Air Drive, isn't it correct? There are a couple other houses.
Well, this is the first one in this particular subdivision.
Okay.
There's another one under construction now, but it's going to have a nitrate reducing system.
Okay. So this, and just for clarification, maybe staff can jump in here and correct me if I'm wrong, but we're not removing the entire plat note, or are we?
Through the chair, Mr. Kange, you're correct. This is exempting one individual lot from the plat note, and this is not precedent setting. All the other lots are subject to that plat note.
Okay, thank you.
Are there any other questions for the petitioner's representative? Thank you. Is there anyone from? I'm sorry. There are a couple of questions. Mr. Cole, and then Mr. Walker.
So I'm going to apologize up front because I'm probably the least knowledgeable about what's going on here. But if you don't get the variance for this lot, what is the consequence? I mean, what happens? Can you just explain that to me?
I can.
Better understanding?
Well, I think that the city is complicit in this also because they did review the design and they found.
I understand all that, but let's just say that you don't get it. And I'm not saying that that's how I'm going to vote, but will you just tell me what happens for this lot? How is there something has to be added? Is there a fix? Is it a cost? Can you give me a sense of what happens?
We're going to have to put in a nitrate reducing system. The existing system can be partially reused. It's still going to involve a cost approximating $20,000.
Okay, so that's what my question is. So this will just take a fix, but it'll be another $20,000.
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Walker,
That was my question.
that was your question. Thank you. Are there any other questions? Mr. Fuller?
Just one question. So is it up and operating now and people occupying the property?
Yes.
Okay, so it'd be a substantial time and moving effort, or they'd have to be away from the house for some period of time.
There'd be some problems there.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Is there anyone from the public wishing to testify tonight? Anyone at all? Would you like to use, Mr. Anderson, would you like to use any of your time for rebuttal?
Yes, I would.
This is your opportunity.
I guess not right now.
This is the last, but you did, and now is the time that you can use it. Okay. Mr. Anderson's stating that he's not going to use his rebuttal time. There's no one from the public wishing to testify. The public hearing portion is closed. The matter now rests with the board. May I have a positive motion, please? Mr. Cole.
Can I ask staff a question?
You can.
So, could you again, I apologize up front, but the idea here is that we should give this property owner a variance because it's better to allow them to have a variance and avoid the cost of correcting this and let everybody else in the neighborhood comply with that? Can you give me I'm a little bit confused on this thing, and I apologize.
Through the chair, Mr. Cole, thank you for the question. The planning department is recommending approval for the petitioner's request to be exempted from the plat note for one individual lot. There are many lots in the subdivision. They're just requesting an exemption for their own lot. Really, the merit for exempting them is found on the first page of your packet towards the bottom. It starts out, it says, Plat Note 10 was approved by the Platting Board with Plat 2011-62 based on on a soils report prepared by J.A. Munter Consulting Incorporated, which recommended using advanced water treatment systems within the subdivision. Enclosed is an email from J.A. Munter Consulting Incorporated and the On-Site Water and Wastewater Services Division, which makes the following findings. First, the nitrate model used to analyze the impact of conventional on-site septic systems on drinking water wells in the area was based on the entire subdivision of 37 lots being developed, and that the model was conservative. Second, a conventional on-site septic system on an individual lot where the soils are good, such as the subject property, would have little effect on the drinking water wells in the area. And then third, it would not be cost effective to upgrade the existing conventional system to an advanced system. Based on these findings that are provided to us by the engineer that made the original recommendation in favor of nitrate reducing systems, the advanced systems, and the agreement from the On-Site Water and Wastewater Services Division, who's responsible for reviewing these, planning feels confident recommending approval for the petitioner's request.
So in essence, they went back to the original person who said if you give an exception for one thing, it makes sense, it's not going to hurt anything, and it'd be cost ineffective to make them change just for that one.
That's right.
Thank you.
Any other questions of staff? May I have a positive motion, please? Mr. Kange.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Case S 12033-1 Shangri-La Estates. I move. Oh, a motion here. I move to. There we go. I move to remove the restrictive plat note number 10, which states this subdivision has been approved for use of on-site well and septic systems in accordance with AMC 15-65-181 for Block 2, Lot 5 of Shangri-La Estates subdivision.
Thank you. And Ms. Enix, seconds. Would you speak to your motion, please?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Based on the testimony of the petitioner's representative, the information provided in the staff packet with regard to J.A. Munter Consulting Incorporated also took into account in my motion that Rabbit Creek Community Council was notified and gave no response to this, and it appears that on-site water and wastewater services has no objection to allowing a conventional on-site septic system. I tend to vote in favor of this motion.
Thank you. Is there any additional discussion? Mr. Walker.
Is there any way that we can only exempt them until this thing needs to be replaced? I mean, septic systems don't last forever, right?
That's
So
correct.
when it comes up for its normal life expectancy, can't we make them be subject to the same requirements that everyone else is on replacement?
It would require, yes, you could.
And that would require a modification or amendment to this motion pending presently?
That's correct.
I'd propose that we amend the motion to allow the exemption only to last until it's replaced.
Okay. And is there a second to that?
Doesn't that raise, I mean, excuse me, but doesn't that raise issues on what's in, that raise issues for our, on our vote, I guess. No, I'll wait till we get to the discussion portion.
So we now have a motion on the floor. Is there a second to this motion? There's no second. Okay. And Mr. Cole, did you?
Well, I'm concerned because that question wasn't asked to staff about having a septic system upgraded. I mean, before we make that amendment, I'm unclear about what that would cost, why it's necessary, and so I guess I was uncomfortable in. And that's why I was going to wait to see who seconded that to go to the discussion stage to ask why we would do that when we haven't. I'm not clear what the process is for replacing a septic system and putting in this nitrate system after the life has gone by. And I didn't put that very artfully, but I apologize. So
Maybe I can address that. When septic systems, when lots are approved for septic systems, they have to put in a reserve field. So when the first system fails or is close to time to be replaced, then the replacement goes into the second or third area that's been reserved for that. Or if it's usable, it could go back in the first, I guess. At any rate, what Mr. Walker was proposing that when the first system wears out or fails, that it it be replaced with an advanced treatment system. That was his motion.
See, I appreciate that, but when I was listening to Mr. Fuller, I got the sense that this new system was going to cause people to leave their house. So this system is put in place out in the field area, not in the house itself.
That's correct. It's
You're not doing any structural damage. This is all outside the house.
It's outside the bounds of the house, yes. And there's separation distances between the leach field. So there's a septic system, then there's a leach field that's attached to it. And then there's a separation distance between that and the nearest water wells.
I guess my question then would be, why didn't staff suggest that? Was there a reason why that wasn't suggested for our consideration? Is there a specific reason? Was it discussed with the petitioner? Shouldn't we ask the petitioner if they have an objection to that? I mean, it seems like it's something that's never come up.
Through the chair, Mr. Cole, the motion can be amended to, as suggested by Mr. Walker, to require future systems to upgrade to the nitrate-reducing advanced system. This question was never, it wasn't the petitioner's request, and it wasn't something that staff considered doing, just wasn't considered or thought of. Staff doesn't have an opinion on that amendment. It can be done. I don't know what the unintended consequences might be. Maybe they'll try and avoid that cost, extend the life of the existing system longer than it should. I just don't know how this would play out, a couple decades from now. I don't have any other comments.
Without a second, the motion fails. Well, is there any additional discussion? I can't support this motion as it sits because, as a hydrogeologist, I realize that I disagree with the calculations that were done and the methods that were used. The model that was used is called a mass balance model, and I think that's an appropriate model. The way the model was used, the entire subdivision was modeled as one leach field, and that's not the way hydrogeology works. There are areas where, if there was a vacant lot, for example, that would be included in this model. And I don't wish to create a burden for the property owner. I realize that everybody would suffer from this, and I'm going to propose an additional motion that this be sent back to on-site services, and a new model be provided that considers this lot with the existing system. It considers the upgradient lots with the advanced wastewater treatment systems and the effluent from those, and determine if this meets the municipality's requirement. Is there anyone who would wish to second that motion? Mr. Walker seconds the motion. And I will speak to this motion, although I somewhat have, in that I believe the calculations should be provided to staff so that staff can evaluate the calculations, and they could resolve if there's a need to change the system as the original plat note or to allow it to stay in place, and let staff use on-site information rather than ignoring this. The model that's there right now ignores all the percolation tests that were done by the engineers. It ignores the gradient that was measured by the engineers, and I believe that the model should be based on the actual site data, not based on, not deviated from, the calculations shouldn't deviate from the model, which they do now. Mr. Cole, did you have a comment?
I have to say that this is a technical area that I'm not familiar with, and so I have to defer to a certain amount. But I think the petition, I would like to know what the effects of this are on the property owner until this gets resolved. Is there, I mean, they have a house that has a septic system that's not in compliance. They're asking for a variation. There's going to be some delay. What happens in the interim, just so that I can have a better understanding of that?
Would you like to ask the petitioner's representative?
That would be okay. Sure.
Mr. Anderson?
Am I limited just to speak to that?
You're allowed to answer the question. Yes.
He can't get a CO for his house. He can't get his final certification. So he's prevented from doing that until this issue is resolved.
So is that the builder or the buyer?
This is the buyer.
And how long would it take to resolve it according to the motion?
It could take a considerable amount of time. The city approved this study that was done. They're the ones who said the subdivision could go through. So they've reviewed all of the information from Jim Munter, the hydrogeologist, and they approved his study. So finding fault with it now, in my mind, is not right.
Well, yeah, I understand your concern there, but at the end of the day, we're supposed to do the right thing, not compound errors, right? You'd agree with me on that.
Well, how do we know we're compounding an error?
Well, I mean, that's the question. I mean, that's one of the issues that's in front of us. I agree with you on that, but
we've gone back to the person who prepared the report. He says there is no error.
Well, it would be nice to have him here too.
The city reviewed that and they agree.
Because there's been some pretty significant issues. I mean, again, I'm not an expert in this. I'm relying upon other people. But it does seem like some of the issues that have been raised are of concern. But as a person without knowledge and without specialties, I can't address that.
Well, isn't that why we rely on the city and the staff to review all this information and offer recommendations?
Yeah, I agree with you on that.
Are there any other questions for the petitioner's representative? Mr. Fuller?
I do. Through the chair, please. Realistic, the way I read it, he's basically saying he was overly conservative, and the way it sounds to me like the individual lots ought to be determined at their carrying capacity, whether or not they need the extra, not the whole subdivision. They've somehow tied the whole subdivision to a criteria that may not be necessary for half the lots or more.
I guess in my opinion, that's probably true. In his opinion, it does raise the nitrate level. It doesn't raise it over the maximum amount allowed. So it does raise the nitrate level, but certainly doesn't put anyone in peril.
Right.
According to his finding.
Right. Okay. Thanks.
Mr. Cole and then Mr. Walker.
So while I have you here, Mr. Walker proposed amending the request that at the end of the life of the septic system, it be upgraded to what everybody else is applied to. You didn't have a chance to speak to that. Do you have any position on that, or the owners have any position on that?
Well, I'm sure the owners do, due to the increased cost. I believe that...
what's the increased cost? Is it another $20,000?
Yes. But it would be more than that at that time, I would imagine. He'd have to replace his tank and his field.
Could be less with technology.
Well, possibly, but I doubt it. I mean, the way things are going. This lot abuts a 20-acre wetland, open area, and then there's wetland downslope from it. So it's a long way for the septic effluent leaving this property to where it even becomes a problem. Now, this is
My
different.
question is, do you have a position on the amendment? Would they be not in favor of that, or would they be in favor of that?
Well, the homeowner, I don't think would be in favor of it.
Okay.
Any other questions for the petitioner's representative? Thank you. So we have I have the motion that I made on the floor to provide calculations and revisit with the on-site. Is there any opposition to my motion?
Mr. Chair,
Yes. Mr. Kange?
while I appreciate the concern of the petitioner's representative, the petitioner, staff, and your position, I won't be voting in favor of your motion. I feel that would be somewhat unjust at this point to the petitioner to put them through that. I understand this was a screw-up from the beginning, but I do go back to the consultant and on-site. I have to believe that they're, particularly the municipal's on-site, as the kind of the authority on this, and go back to their comment that doing this wouldn't have a huge impact. That's all I have to say.
Thank you. Since there's opposition, any other discussion? Since there's opposition, we're going to vote. No additional discussion. So we'll vote. A yes vote will require a site-specific model and on-site services to review it. And a no vote will not. And that motion fails. So we're back to the main motion.
Point of information, what was the vote on that?
It was, it's not complete. It is 5 nay and 1 yay.
I'm just going to slow things down. Pardon me. I just want to slow things down so that I understand what just occurred. So, Mr. Young's amendment, the vote for that motion was 5 in favor and 1 against.
No, it was 5 against and 1 in favor.
Okay. So anyway, the way that we handle these is there was 1 in favor and 5 against. So it fails. Thank you. Thank you for that.
You're welcome. Okay, Mr. Kange, did you have a
Sorry,
comment?
my button was just on.
Okay,
Going back to the original motion, was there a second on my original motion?
I can't remember who, but there was. Oh, it was Ms. Enix, yes.
Okay, that's right. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, one more comment from staff. It would, in this sort of situation, it'd be useful for each board member to weigh in during the discussion period, because if it was discovered that the motion fails, if there weren't 5 votes, and the motion would fail, then the board may entertain some other sort of creative solution for it. It's just useful for each person to weigh in advance of the vote in many cases. Thank you.
Okay, we can do that. So, before we vote, we have a motion on the floor. And before we vote, is there any additional discussion or any additional, anybody who's going to vote against this? Mr. Walker.
I oppose giving a blanket exemption in perpetuity on this property. I think that this property, a mistake was made, and a reasonable solution in the interim is to allow them to be exempt from the plat requirement of a nitrogen-reducing system. But I think on replacement, they should be subject to the same standards and same costs as the rest of their neighbors as originally set, and they shouldn't get the lifetime benefit of a less expensive property simply because of the good fortune of having had a mistake made.
Thank you. Any other discussion? Mr. Fuller, and then Mr. Cole.
Yeah, I think the cost probably is a retroactive effect rather than the initial cost. I don't know that for a fact, but it'd be slightly higher. But when you have to dig something up to put something else in, that significantly raises the cost. And it seems like the testimony from the original engineer and the city, that what I read is that it's overly conservative approach, and I'd actually be in favor of removing the plat note from all of them, or modifying the plat note that each lot needs to be determined in its own case, like 90% of the other lots in town that have septic systems, because you're putting an extra burden on all those lots now for development. I don't think that's what we're here for. So, thanks.
Thank you. And Mr. Cole?
Well, now that I have a little bit better understanding of what's going on, I tend to agree with Mr. Walker. So I'm going to vote against this motion also, simply because it seems to me that if I understand at this point it would be an added burden to require them to retroactively refit this. So I understand the need to give them a variance. I don't read the email to be a blanket support to remove all of the original recommendation to all the properties, so I wouldn't be in favor of that. But it does seem to me that even though there was a mess up, we have an opportunity to fix it, even if it's at some point in the future. And the fact that everybody else in that neighborhood is going to have to be burdened by that, and that this was on the plat, it should be, the parcel should be put in the position that they should have been, but for this little excerpt. So I am going to vote against this one, and would now have joined Mr. Walker in his original motion, but that's not in front of us at this time.
Thank you. And Mr. McLaughlin?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Point of order. It appears that there are at least 3 votes against the motion. The original motion in favor of the petitioner's request would fail, and we'd be done for the night with this case. If the board wants to proceed that way, that's fine. If Mr. Walker or another commissioner makes a different motion, then you could vote on that motion, and that would, replace the original motion. The reason why I keep interrupting is because it's important that there's not a procedural error, of course, because of the potential for an appeal or litigation. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, I am going to vote against the original motion, and the reason that I'm going to vote against it is I have the technical background to understand the models that were used. The model that was used the calculations that were used did not follow the model procedures. It's a mass balance, and part of that model was not followed. The inputs were not substantiated, and this, I think that it's unfortunate that the owner is caught in a situation. I know it's unfortunate, and I believe that a solution to this would be having a site-specific evaluation done. If I was doing this, which I can't, for the owner, it would take me on the order of 4 hours of effort. 4 hours of effort means that tomorrow it could be in front of the staff, but that motion failed. I accept that. But I'm not supporting this because I don't believe that J.A. Munner's model is adequate for the discussion and the decision that we have to make tonight. Is there any additional discussion?
I would like to re-urge my motion on the amendment to the motion allowing that the exception would exist during the life of the existing leach field system, and once it's met its life expectancy, the exemption would be withdrawn.
Thank you. Is there a second? And Mr. Cole seconds. Mr. Walker, would you speak to your motion, please?
I think that amending the request will allow the homeowner to have occupancy of their house this winter. I think it's too late in the season to be changing the septic system. I think that allowing them to have access to it is not going to overburden the specific area during the life of the property, so long as everyone else has a nitrogen-reducing system. And I think that the benefit of the error is eliminated at the point in time when the leach field has met its life expectancy.
Thank you. Is there any discussion for Mr. Walker's motion? Mr. Cole.
I intend to vote in favor of this simply because of all the alternatives that we have in front of us. This seems to be the most reasonable in going forward, and in balancing the hardships and the need for compliance. This seems to be the most reasonable under the circumstances at that time, and so that for that reason I'll be supporting that motion.
Thank you. Is there any opposition to the motion? Is there any additional discussion? Then this motion, did you have a question, Mr. Kange? Okay, my apologies. Then this motion carries. There's no opposition. So now we're back to the main motion. Is there any additional discussion on the main motion? And since there's opposition, we will vote. Oh, Mr. Kange.
Just a point of clarification.
Yes.
If the amended motion passed, I can't withdraw my motion since there's been a second. We have to vote on it. This is a point of order. Okay.
Yes, we'll go to the vote. And the motion passes. There was 5 yeses and 1 no. The next case is S12029-1, Your Park Subdivision. May we have staff's presentation, please?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is a request for subdivision of lots 5, 6, and 7, Block 14, Roosevelt Park Addition, into one lot. This subdivision will eliminate the interior lot lines between the 3 lots and create proposed Lot 5A of Uri Park Subdivision. Staff analysis found the zoning for proposed Lot 5A is zoned R2M, multifamily residential. There is currently a request from the petitioner to rezone lots 5, 6, and 7 from R2M to PLI, Public Lands and Institutions District. This site has been dedicated parkland since 1984. The proposed plat meets the minimum lot size and width required by each respective zoning district. Rights-of-way, the West Tudor Road along the southern boundary is currently a 30-foot right-of-way dedication. To meet the minimum requirements for right-of-way, staff recommends the dedication of 30 feet of right-of-way along the southern boundary of proposed Lot 5A. That being said, staff recommends approval for the Uri Park subdivision for 18 months, subject to the following 1 through 8 conditions found on page 6 and 7 of the packet, with one modification. On page 7, it's labeled number 4. That should be number 8 of the 1 through 8. That was a spelling mistake. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any questions of staff? Will the petitioner's representative please step forward?
Mr. Chairman, the petitioner's representative is not with us tonight.
Thank you. I'll direct the board to go to on the button on your monitor to the left that says on the floor at the bottom. So we don't have the petitioner's representative tonight. Is there anyone here from the public wishing to testify? Would you step forward, please? State your name, spell your last name for the record.
My name is William Marsh, M-A-R-S-H.
Thank you.
And I guess I don't need to reserve any time for rebuttal if there's no one here. I believe our comments are in the packet. We're the adjoining landholder. The rezoning of Uri Park and the replatting of Uri Park is being done to accommodate a non-conforming building desired by the Lions Club, the current user group. As the adjoining landholder, we are very much opposed to an increase in a non-conforming building. It was a park yesterday. It'll be a park tomorrow. We don't need to replat it. By replatting it, you open the door to a much larger structure than the 1,000 square foot footprint. And the stated purpose of this replat and this rezone is to allow the Lions Club to demolish the existing house and replace it with a community center and warehouse. It was the subject of an hour-long debate at the community center, at the Spenard Community Council meeting. That's the stated purpose. It is not a housekeeping measure. It's a design to allow under a PLI a non-conforming structure, and as the adjoining landholder, we're opposed.
Thank you. Are there any questions for Mr. Marsh? Thank you. Is there anyone else from the public wishing to testify tonight? Mr. Walker? Or Mr. Cole? Did you have a question, Mr. Cole? You may.
Well, I had a couple questions.
Okay. Mr. Marsh, would you come back, please? We have some questions for you. Thank you.
The first one is for staff, which is, Mr. Marsh is here now. We don't have the representative, the owner's representative. And could you speak to the opposition that the Marshes have filed in this? Was it considered?
Through the chair, Mr. Cole, yes, I can speak to that opposition. This is a platting action. It's not a request for a zoning permitted use. This is when we review this, we're simply looking at it for conformance with the subdivision regulations. We can't take into consideration with this plat what may or may not happen with the development of the property. While I completely understand Mr. Marsh's concerns, and there will be another time to address that in the future, that time is unfortunately not tonight with the platting action, because we don't know exactly what is going to happen. The staff has not reviewed any plans associated with the Lions Club development. This is simply a platting action to remove 2 interior lot lines. And so that's all we can review and ensure that they conform, that this plat conforms to the subdivision regulations.
Thank you. I don't have any further questions.
Can I speak to his comment, sir?
Is there, yes, you may.
I appreciate that this normally would be a no discussion item, this rezone. However, when you erase these lot lines, you have to keep in mind this lot is less than 40% buildable. And by erasing the lot lines, you open the door to a very large structure. That's why we're opposing this. The future use of this park is really important to our family. And that's the stated purpose, is to have a 20-year land use contract on the April ballot. Our time, we feel like, is running out. That was told to me by Assemblyman Ernie Hall in an October 16th conversation I had with him. There, it seems like time is very short to us.
The rezone from the current zoning to public lands and institutions, PLI, is not something that we can address with this board.
I understand that that's not your purview. I wanted to make the Platting Board aware of what happens when you erase the lot lines and the downslope, so to speak. The unintended consequences is the intended purpose is to build a new structure. If you leave the lot lines and leave the park as it is, it will greatly diminish the ability to build new structures under a future PLI.
Thank you. Is there anyone else wishing to testify tonight? Anyone else at all? Hearing and seeing none, the public hearing portion is closed, and the matter now rests with the board. May I have a positive motion, please, in this case? Mr. Walker.
I move to approve the plat for 18 months subject to conditions 1 through 8 on pages 6 and 7 of the item A's as the
Thank you. Mr. Cole seconds. Mr. Walker, will you speak to your motion, please?
With respect to
Thank you. Is there any additional discussion? Is there any additional findings? Is there any opposition to this motion? Before we vote, or before this is approved, I would like to state that the proposed plat on page 5, staff has found that the plat meets the minimum lot size and width required by each respective zoning district, and what we're approving tonight is in compliance with the ordinances. And much of this property isn't usable because it's in a floodplain. So this, to me, this makes sense to vote yes, so I'm going to support this. Any opposition? Hearing and seeing none, the motion carries. The next case is S12032-1, Abbott Loop Christian Center subdivision. May we have staff's presentation, please?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is a request for a preliminary plat to subdivide one tract and one lot into one different tract and one different lot. Trailside Heights LLC is requiring approximately 2 acres from Abbott Loop Christian Chapel to provide additional multi-family housing on proposed lot 3A. The proposed plat includes 2 zoning districts, proposed tracts A-2A, and that portion of proposed lot 3A, north of the, quote, line to be eliminated, end quote, is zoned PLI, Public Lands and Institutions District. The remainder of proposed lot 3A is zoned R3SL, Multiple Family Residential District with special limitations. The petitioner submitted a rezone application to rezone that portion of proposed Lot 3A north of the, quote, line to be eliminated, end quote, to R3SL multifamily residential district with special limitations to conform to the zoning already in place. The Planning and Zoning Commission recommended approval of the rezone on November 18, 2013, and it will soon be scheduled before the Assembly for approval. Staff is requesting that the rezone be completed prior to the recording of the final plat to ensure that split zoning does not incur on this property. With this platting action, both proposed lots and tracts are provided physical and legal access. With that being said, staff would like to recommend approval of the plat, subject to the conditions listed on pages 6 and 7 of your, actually 6, 7, and 8 of your staff packet, with 2 minor corrections. On condition of approval number 4, it states obtaining letters of non-objection from all affected utilities for the encroachment of a 2-story church located on proposed tract A-2A into a 10-foot T&E easement adjacent to Abbott Road. The plat provided by the petitioner's representative does in fact show that the building is not within the easement, although it's somewhat unclear. So I would like to strike that condition number 4 from staff's recommendations. As was stated in the staff report, the rezone was heard by the Planning and Zoning Commission, and at that hearing, the Planning and Zoning Commission recommended it as an SL, a special limitation. A note be placed on the plat requiring a secondary access conforming to the fire department standards. So with that, staff would like to add a condition of approval that states, quote, resolving with current planning and fire prevention the need to provide a plat note requiring a secondary access to the site that conforms to the fire department standards, end quote. Thank you.
Do you have that written down?
I do. Would you like me to repeat it or bring it over to you?
The third alternative will come get it. Which number would this be? Item E?
Mr. Chairman, I would not like to make that item E. In fact, I'd like to make it a separate condition. Item E would have been a plat note. I would like to make it a separate condition so it could replace item 4 that was stricken from staff's recommendation, if you'd like.
Thank you. Any other questions of staff? May we have the petitioner's representative, please? State your name, spell your last name for the record, and would you like to reserve any time for rebuttal?
Yes.
How much time would you like to reserve?
The remaining time.
Thank you.
Ben Haron, H-R-O-N, Centec Surveying. We have no objection to most of the items on the list, although item A3, obtaining a variance for the non-conforming rights of the structure encroached on a 2-story church located on the proposed tract A2. The existing church footprint is shown on the previous plat, and I just had a question for staff as to if that was addressed at that time during that platting case or if it was been addressed since then. I know the church is going through renovations, and is there some other place that is that is being dealt with? And does it need to be a restrictive sign-off for this plating case? Sure. It's number 3.
A3?
Yes, A3.
A3 on page 6.
So the existing building footprint is within the setbacks of the zoning? And my question to staff is, in the 2008 plat, was this issue addressed at that time because the zoning hasn't changed? And
Through the chair, Mr. Haran, I can definitely address that question. Essentially, the way it works is I believe that structure has non-conforming rights. However, if in fact there was an addition or modification made to that structure that would void the non-conforming rights between the 2008 plat and the plat that we're talking about, you would then need to get a variance. So the condition is written in such a way that if you didn't have non-conforming rights, you would then obtain a variance. You would have to go and obtain a variance. If non-conforming rights have already been established, then you could just simply provide that to me. I believe that they already are done and have been established, but it's kind of a formal process that if you just provide that to me, it should be no problem.
okay. And the only other objection we had was the Planning and Zoning Commission's. I just wanted to be clear on it that it was not to be a note on the plat, but it was to be a sign-off on the summary of action. That's another question for staff, I guess.
Through the chair, Mr. Haran, as written, the recommended special limitation was to provide a plat note requiring a secondary access meeting fire standards. However, I feel like this needs to be explored a little bit more. It was kind of, it was given to me at the 11th hour, so to speak, and I feel like making this a resolve comment so that we can work on it internally is more appropriate, and that's why I've made it a separate standalone condition and not a plat note that needs to be necessarily placed on this plat right now.
Okay. And I believe other than that, well, there was one more thing, I'm sorry. Number 8, A8, installing interior landscape easement within the arterial landscape easements. And again, just wondering why that's being enforced on this one when the easement already exists. And
through the chair, Mr. Haran, again, this is when you have a new platting action. It opens up the book to allow us to require you to provide landscaping. If the landscaping is already there, then you simply provide us with a landscaping plan showing us the existing landscaping. If it meets the arterial landscaping standards, then we accept that.
okay. I don't think I have any further comments.
Thank you. You have 8 minutes and 15 seconds left for rebuttal. Are there questions of the petitioner? Thank you.
Thank you.
Is there anyone from the public wishing to testify tonight? Anyone at all? Hearing and seeing none, would you like to use any of your rebuttal time? The answer is no. This portion of the public hearing is closed. The matter now rests with the board. I would like to invite a positive motion, and Mr. Walker is going to make the motion.
As to case number S12032-1, Abbott Loop Christian Center subdivision, I move the approval of the plat for 18 months, subject to items 1 through 10 as shown on page 6 through 8 with the 2 following modifications. With respect to item number 4, that will be stricken, A4 on page 6, and item 11 would be added on page 8. It says resolving with current planning and fire prevention, the need to provide a plat note requiring a secondary access to the site that conforms to the fire department standards.
Thank you. And Mr. Kane seconds. And Mr. Walker, will you speak to your motion, please?
On reviewing the information provided and based on testimony and the report from the department, it appears that the plat is in order and that the recommendations are sufficient to meet all of the requirements.
Thank you. Are there any additional comments or discussion? Any additional findings? Mr. Kange.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would just like to point out that this approval does comply with municipal codes and standards and has been supported, as noted in our staff packet, by the commenting agencies.
Thank you. Are there any additional discussion or findings? Is there any opposition to the motion? Hearing and seeing none, the motion passes. Thank you. The next case is S12019-1 Waldron Subdivision. May I have a motion to postpone this case indefinitely? Mr. Kange. Mr. Cole seconds. Is there any opposition to this motion? Hearing and seeing none, this motion passes, and the case S12019-1 Waldron Subdivision is postponed indefinitely. Is there any appearance request tonight? No. Are there any other requests tonight? No. Are there any persons to be heard tonight? Are there any reports from the chair? No. The secretary? No, we don't have any committees. Board members' comments. I see everybody is willing to move. Okay, may I have a motion for adjournment? Mr. Kange and Ms. Enoch seconds, and the meeting is adjourned. Thank you, everybody. Lively night.